Okay, students, in these sessions, we will study about parameters and arguments. There are some confusing terms in functions, so let's clarify them first. So first, parameter and arguments. So people often use the terms parameters and arguments interchangeably. So you cannot expect people to use these two terms consistently, so beware of that. But correct way of using parameters and argument is that we use parameters when we are talking about the variable list inside the round brackets in the function definitions. And we use arguments to refer the values that is passed to the functions when the function is called. So parameter is a variable in a function definitions, and argument is a value of the parameters. And the call by value and call by reference is completely different terms. So we have already learned these two concepts. They are completely different one. So just they are mechanism used in passing parameters from one functions to other functions. So don't be confusing about these terms. So if you look at this example, this double N1, double N2 is the parameters. And here var1 and var2 is our arguments. So this is a function call and this is function definitions. So this is arguments and this is parameters. Don't be confused about this one. Okay, so now let's talk more about the parameters. So we have already learned about call by references in other sessions, which allows callee functions to modify data in caller functions. This is definitely useful in some cases, but it sounds very dangerous because callee functions might from untrusted parties. So which means caller's data can be changed by these untrusted parties, which is very dangerous. So if we use a const modifier like this, we can protect the caller's data even we still pass the reference. So this is a call by reference parameter because of this ampersand. We learned this in previous sessions. And if we put the constants keyword here, this becomes constants reference parameters. And this one, you get a call by reference parameters that cannot be changed by callee. So this allows arguments read-only by functions. So no change allowed inside the function body, even though this is reference parameters. This is very common practice in C++ functions. You will see a lot of these const keyword when you are looking at C++ open source projects. So for the types we have seen so far, this has no advantage. So it's very difficult for us to understand when to use this const reference parameter at this point, but it will turns out to be useful with array and class type parameters. We will see this in later sessions. And we can combine both call by value and call by value parameters and call by reference parameter in the same functions. So we can mix the parameter list. So if you look at mixed call functions here, it consists of call by reference parameters and call by value parameters and the const reference parameter here. So when you call these functions, the first argument must be this is arguments and this is parameter. We clarified the difference between arguments and parameter in the previous slides. So when you call this mixed core functions, the first argument must be integer type because of its int, and it passes the reference of this variable. It's passed to this parameter. And for the second one has to be integer type as well, and it passes the value because it's based on the call by value. And the third one must be double type, and it passes the constants reference here. And another thing I'd like to talk about in the parameter is naming. So we should give meaningful name to parameters. We already talked about naming rules for identifiers in week 1. Like identifiers, we should give a meaningful name to function parameters so that people can easily understand the purpose of each parameter and the function. And functions are independent modules that are designed separately from the rest of the program. So on large project, it is highly likely that functions are developed by different programmers. So programmers should choose the most meaningful name for the parameters and function name. It is okay to give parameter names as same as argument name, providing that the argument names are given meaningful name. So argument may well be variables in other functions. So if programmer follows the naming rules for identifier, the variable should have a meaningful name. So many times the parameter names are same as the argument names. And obviously we should also give a meaningful name to function. So let's see the example code showing parameter name same as argument name here. If you look at here, there is a function declarations. There is a function called triangle area, and it has two parameters, int type of two parameters, name, height, and base. You can guess what this function does by reading this function name and the parameter names. So these functions calculates the area of the triangle, and it receives height and base of the triangle. We can easily figure out what the triangle function does, even we did not look at the function definitions, or we did not even read the description of these functions. We can just guess by reading the function name and the parameter names. So giving meaningful name is always very important. So comparing this triangle to this fun1 function, can you understand what this fun1 function does? I don't think so. Its function name does not give any informations. And also the parameter name do not give information about this function. So without looking at the function body or the description of this function, we cannot guess what this function does. So if you compare this to, you can understand the importance of giving meaningful name to function name and the parameter names. It's much more, it will make the program easy to understand. And if you look at here, there is a function call statement here. It's calling triangle area functions, and it passes the height and base. Height and base is a local variable of these main functions. So what we can see is that this is arguments and this is parameters. So as you can see here, arguments name and the parameter name is same. So it's perfectly fine to do this naming. You can always give a same name for parameters. You can give an argument name to a parameters. It's syntactically correct. So in these sessions, we learn about the difference between arguments and parameters. And we also learned about const reference parameter, which prevents Colli functions to modify caller data. And we saw that we can mix call by value, call by reference, and const reference parameter in the same functions. And we also talk about the importance of namings of parameters and function names. So that's it for today's session. And see you next sessions.